Hi, everyone. A note before we start. This episode was recorded prior to the U.S. launch of Project Epic Fury on February 28, 2026. The context and perspectives shared here will not reflect the most recent developments overseas. That said, the analysis and insights you are about to hear remain directly relevant to the issues leaders are navigating today. Stay with us and let's get started. Welcome back to Full Circle. I'm Hilary Doyle. Canada is racing to diversify trade, build a homegrown and leading defense industrial strategy, all while balancing a traditionally resource-based economy with a digitally sovereign, tech-enabled future. There is a lot going on, and this episode isn't going to be about predictions. It is going to be about how Canadian leaders should approach decision-making and action when conditions simply are not going to stabilize. Our question: how will geopolitical shifts affect your organization's growth, risk, and productivity? And how should this reshape the decisions you're making in real time? To help make sense of this complex moment, we are joined by Mike McNair, President and CEO of the Arctic Economic Development Corporation, and Trevin Stratton, Global Leader of Deloitte's Economic Advisory Practice.
Thanks for having me.
It has been 15 months of reaction and reordering. Leaders are actively evaluating, where they can play offense, whether it's been through emerging Arctic trade routes, new trade corridors, or simply positioning their business for the new pools of money locally in AI, defense, and infrastructure. Mike, you've chosen to come back to Canada to lead the AEDC. What is its vision for Canadian business?
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. I think a lot of people have increasingly come to understand that the Canadian Arctic is a critical part of our country, and it is a part of our country that requires more investment, more talent, more know-how, more partnership with the Indigenous people and other Northerners that live in the Arctic to bring it into the fabric of our country more fully. And in so doing, it not only strengthens our country as a whole, but also there is commercial opportunity there, and success and investment is dependent on seeking that commercial opportunity. So what we do is we work with partners and we seek to enable infrastructure investment in particular. On our end, ideally, it's really core infrastructure. It's things like marine infrastructure and the enabling business services for that infrastructure to have a more vibrant ecosystem and capabilities that defense and other agencies in the government of Canada could use to enable a greater Arctic presence as well.
Trevin, obviously the North has been a huge focus for the defense budget. From a capital flow perspective, how and where are you starting to see Canadian investment move differently than it did, say, 15 months ago?
First of all, if we look at foreign investment or international investment coming in, Canada's FDI inflows in 2025 are actually the highest annual inflows since 2007. It's a pretty good news story in that way. That means that foreign investors have invested significantly in Canada over the past year. Now, a lot of that has been M&A activity. That was really the primary driver of the increase. If we're looking at particular sectors, there's a lot of activity in trade and transportation and management companies, followed by manufacturing afterwards as well. If we look at specifically where it's coming from, U.S. direct investment into Canada was pretty much flat last year. It was the same as 2024. If we're looking at other countries, where it came from in particular is the United Kingdom as well. When it comes to outflows, Canadian businesses aren't necessarily investing more abroad over the past year. Canadian companies are investing a lot less in the US than they had previously, but it's also less for other countries around the world too. Now, if we shift our focus more towards domestic investment, Canada's economy grew about 1.7% last year. This is the slowest pace for annual growth since the pandemic, and our economic activity actually contracted in the fourth quarter of last year. And Canadian businesses decided to draw down their inventories in the last quarter too, instead of deciding to produce more. And so this can be a sign, potentially, of weakening business confidence. The Yukon, Northwest Territories are looking to have the highest growth in business investment this year. None of it's going to be down a little bit, but it speaks significantly to our plan for the Arctic.
Okay, let's talk about that plan for the Arctic. Mike, speak to us about where you are seeing hesitation from business leaders when it comes to expansion into the North.
It does feel like the country's in a bit of a chicken and the egg dilemma as it relates to who goes first. And the answer, and by that I mean between the public sector and the private sector, where you talk to government and they say, yeah, we'll invest in projects, but we want to see the private capital that's ready to go. And you talk to private capital, say, yeah, we'll go, but we got to see the government signal that they're in. And obviously both need to mature in partnership together at the same time. And I don't think that our institutions are all that mature at that process so far still. But I do feel an urgency to solve that, both in the private and the public sector, given the context in which we are currently in, and the desire to focus on that, the significant public investments that are happening federally, provincially, and territorially in these particular assets. But I think that the challenge has been we just don't tend to do this quickly, and we don't tend to do it in close partnership between the public and the private sector. And these are both assets that are commercially advantageous and can lead to significant return on investment, but also in the public good that provides spin-off effects that are good for society and good for the country. And that's a tough zone to navigate, and it can only be done in partnership. And that's what I think the task ahead is.
So talking about the chicken and egg, obviously the 2025 federal budget introduces an $81.8 billion investment in defense alongside a defense industrial strategy. The government is focused more than doubling jobs in defense over the next decade, and we are doing a lot of this work for the first time. Mike, you spent 3 years as the global managing director at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. How do you go about building a defense industry in real time and maintain quality and cost control across businesses as they're launching and growing?
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's somewhat framed, as you say, by what I used to do for a living, which was very international in its focus, much less Canadian in its focus. And I think Canada first needs to do that, which is make its baseline of analysis of what it needs to do next, not its own history, but what are other countries around the world doing? Because we're all very different. Every country is different, but they're all facing the same problems, whether it's economic growth, productivity, social issues, or what is happening right now is a rapid scale up of defense sectors, given a very different geopolitical situation. And if you look at Eastern Europe, they are way ahead of us because they are right next to the war in Ukraine. And so you look at a country like Poland, you look at a country like Germany, which did its accelerations of its D&D spend and the need to invest in its industrial strategy alongside it. They're a few years ahead of us. And we, by instinct as a country, don't often turn to other jurisdictions as a model. We look to, well, how do we do this in the 1970s? When that's way less relevant than what Poland did 2 years ago. So that's the first thing in terms of methodology. We have to think more internationally about, frankly, something that we are responding to that is international in its nature. We also, in Canada, we are really good at admiring the problem of the productivity challenge. And I don't think there's much more value to be had in terms of the analysis of the problem. And we know the answer, which is we need more capital investment, we need more technology, and we need to scale up quickly internally within our own economic capacity. And that is, I would imagine, part of the intent behind the defense industrial strategy and the prioritization of build over partner and buy. But our institutions, and by that I include private sector institutions, this will be a big change. And ultimately, as I said, I'll end where I started. That will be a better process if it is international in its scope of analysis of models to use, not national.
Mike, you've seen transitions around the globe through your work with the Blair Institute. You're looking at Poland, you're looking at Germany. What specific lessons could leaders zero in on right now as they think about building in Canada over the next 10 years?
Well, I think for us, it has been so easy to rely on a partnership with the United States for most of our needs, particularly in the defense and industrial sector. And it's been easy to default to that. And even in recent years, as things have become more tense, that remains the default. And I think culturally, if everyone's honest with themselves, it remains the case as it relates to defense industrial strategy. So this is a pivot away from that and to develop more sovereign industrial capability, including that being used for export. And in Europe, they have been working on that and the development of more sovereign capabilities for some time now. And in fact, that actually makes Europe a very attractive market for Canada for some of the only stuff that we can do, as well as to import from. And it's not a binary question, too, is the other shit. It's very easy to get into the trap of, okay, well, we'll never go to 0% with the United States. The force of gravity of geography is real. However, we are overweight. And there are other countries, particularly in Europe, that have zeroed in much more on what are the sovereign capabilities that we're willing to invest in that maybe aren't the highest ultimate efficiency and economic cost for us to build it ourselves, but we need to be able to do this in Canada. And by being able to do it in Canada, there are spin-off subsidiary industries that are thus created. And there are models of that, particularly in Europe, and that focus on national sovereign capability that goes much further than where we are in Canada.
Trevin, we're talking about economics here. We're looking at a 10-year defense industrial strategy that really is focused on building this industry from the ground up. China has a 5-year plan. Could we be moving faster, and do we need to?
Now, I'm not sure if the length of the plan is really what matters at the end of the day. Canada could potentially achieve more in the first 4 years of its 10-year plan than another country does in a 5-year plan. It's it's all relative in that way. I think what Mike was talking about is very significant when it comes to some of the reasons why we need to think long term about this, is because we have a bit of a defense deficit. Can we move faster? Absolutely, we always can when it comes to large objectives that we need to achieve. And certainly when it comes to our ability to get large projects done in Canada, there have been some questions about that recently from investors and from others as well. I think that one of really the overarching themes of geopolitics, not only in Canada, but elsewhere, is the inextricable links between economics and security now. And that's a very big focus, not only of Canada, but of other countries too. And if we look at it in that way, it definitely has to do with the defense industrial strategy, but it also has to do with our industrial strategy, even apart from defense as well. So for example, if we look at why some countries are reshoring manufacturing, securing critical minerals, looking to have access to semiconductor chips and the hardware needed for artificial intelligence, things like that. It's to ensure that they have the domestic industrial base that it needs for economic and national security in an increasingly insecure world. And so when we kind of think about these two things in tandem, security and economics, it starts to kind of explain what Canada needs to do as a whole for its economic strategy as well, which is just related to defense in some ways. That's not even in the defense strategy.
I mean, there's obviously a lot to do at home, so that makes sense of perhaps why we're not seeing more outflows, at least in the last 15 months or so. How dangerous is it for business leaders to miss this opportunity for expansion? I'd put the question to both of you.
I think that there's definitely a huge opportunity for businesses to be part of it. We're looking to build big things in Canada. But I think a lot of businesses are still waiting for the other shoe to drop as well. When we talk about geopolitics, we talk about geopolitical uncertainty, and there still is some uncertainty. If we're looking at what we need to do to ensure that businesses are able to take the most advantage of the changes that are taking place to be able to help Canada, grow in these different ways. There is a huge event happening in the middle of the year this year when it comes to CUSMA. And I think a lot of businesses, not only in Canada, but abroad, are looking to see what happens with those negotiations or renegotiations and how that's going to impact Canada's economy. And obviously, we've made a number of significant announcements and tying potential government investments to various areas too. There's still a lot of work to be done to be able to get things built, to be able to ensure that we have the labor force that's going to be needed to build the things that we're trying to build, to be able to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, to be able to achieve, our vision for economic independence or a national economy as well. And so, there's a lot of work along the way, but there's still a lot of signals that I think a lot of businesses are waiting for too.
Can we talk a little more about what those signals are specifically? I mean, Mike, what signals are you waiting to hear when it comes to, your focus in Canada and the North?
Well, I think like with any commercial activity, the question is who's your customer? And I think this is kind of what Trevin's getting at. I think if you're a business leader right now trying to figure out where you want to expand and where you want to create your supply chains, it's not clear right now in many instances what's your customer base going to look like in a few years. And so that makes it very difficult to make investment decisions at home and abroad. Now, there are sub-signals we are getting that there's a significant, massive increase in the Canadian defense budget that is underway and has been booked in the federal budget. And so there's a lot of businesses that are orienting themselves in that dimension. Okay, there's a customer there that will need its needs met. And we have also gotten some signals that the Arctic is going to be an area of focus. And our company is one of many that is trying to figure out how does that customer need get serviced, and particularly that it's done in a way that allows Indigenous peoples to get the lion's share of the benefit of it as well. But there's other elements too, which is, again, some of the core infrastructure prioritization that's happening across the country, But you'll notice a theme to what I'm saying here, which is about the strengthening of Canada and what are some of the core fundamental building blocks in our defense, our economic infrastructure, our industries that are being prioritized by the government of Canada and the provinces. That is a clear demand signal that companies, I think, are seeking to respond to, but that even that demand signal is still somewhat new. Like we should not underestimate, even though it all feels that this has been happening for ages. I think this next year will tell us a lot more than what this last year did in terms of what is the customer, the demand signal.
Obviously, Carney's speech changed the global conversation, at least for a moment. Mike, post Davos, what does the coalition of the willing look like for middle powers? Are you seeing any practical progress happening behind the scenes?
I wouldn't claim to have any inside knowledge on your question, but I think what the Canadian Prime Minister, what Prime Minister Carney said at Davos, said out loud what's really going on and what is the challenge confronting middle powers. And I think the reason why it resonated in Canada and abroad is it was refreshing to hear someone say what was actually happening. It didn't have deep solutions about what we do next, but it did call out the reality. Now, I think that some of the things that seem to be in the works, looking to see whether Trans-Pacific Partnership countries could link in with the European Union free trade agreements that exist, and looking for other ways that we can bridge countries to work together, looking for other regional blocks. I think that there's a more transactional, pragmatic approach that Canada is undertaking and is required to undertake because of the nature of changed U.S. policy.
I mean, you're talking about the Gulf states. There's obviously a renewed conversation about China. When the two of you look at global markets right now, where do you feel signals are strongest?
Geographically, I think that there are a lot of opportunities. Economies in the global south are actually integrating more with one another economically than perhaps they were a few years ago, and that's part of their strategy to diversify. And so, if we're looking at potential diversification opportunities, obviously we have a great relationship with the EU. Certainly, when we see, as I mentioned, capital inflows from the UK, those are great opportunities. We have a new trade agreement with China, which is the second largest economy in the world. Now, all of that is great. At the end of the day, we're not going to be able to completely displace the United States as our largest trading partner, nor should we. I mean, the United States is a close ally of ours as well. And obviously, we have great economic connections with them too. But I think it's more about, kind of mitigating risks when it comes to changes in the global economy. The global economy is changing. Other countries' economies are growing significantly as well. And ensuring that Canada is part of that system is going to be very important too. But I think it's not only geographically, it's also about, if we're a business in Canada, how do you allocate capital right now, not only geographically across the world, but in terms of different types of investments? And we see a number of businesses who are looking at different types of kind of corporate capital allocation strategies right now too. They're prioritizing liquidity, building up cash reserves because of the uncertainty if there is a downturn at some point. They're defending the core of their business. Or even reinvesting in the core of their business in many ways. Parts of their business that offer the highest long-term value rather than spreading resources too thin. They're doing portfolio reviews or potentially even divesting of non-core assets as well, and that can help them to fund their essential operations as well. They're looking at things like flexible budgeting. And in a world like this, businesses need to be very agile with the pace at which things are changing and new announcements coming out too. Looking at things like using rolling quarterly, monthly budgets, things like that as well, help build in that agility. And so, looking at how you deploy capital to be able to continue to grow your business in this type of agile environment and uncertain environment is going to be very important for businesses, both on a geographic level, but also in other ways too.
Are you seeing more of that growth becoming focused on Canada first?
We're starting to see it turn a little bit, and specifically in the areas that we've talked about right now too. When it comes to large-scale infrastructure investments that are taking place, many of them might have to do with energy or mining or natural resources or transportation. We're certainly seeing capital being deployed within Canada when it comes to those areas that we're specifically focusing on to be able to grow, to be able to operate in this geopolitical environment. Similarly, when it comes to defense, when it comes to the North or the Arctic, we see investment this year when, we're talking to businesses about investment intentions. Those are the areas that we see significant activity.
So the follow-up question is, what policy or infrastructure bottlenecks do you need to see removed in order to facilitate some of the growth that you're speaking about?
The customer needs to be clear what it wants, and it needs to be quick about it, and it needs to make that decision quickly. And that can be as a very large piece of capital equipment, but it can also mean for a service and the creation of a service agreement or a lease, which if you get a service agreement or a lease with the government of Canada, your ability to then unlock private capital to deploy and meet that need is immense. And that is not traditionally the government showing up as a customer really quickly has not been something that's been all that great at. And part of also what happens, I do think on the business and commercial side is that, you'll often talk to business leaders who don't think government knows how to operate well or, should run more like a business. But meanwhile, they're waiting for government to tell them what the solution is, thinking that somehow there's this magical sense of insight in government that they often deride, when government actually needs business to tell them what they should be asking for a lot of the time, and to lay out the playbook and lay out the roadmap and say, we built this solution for you. We think you could really benefit from this. And here, by the way, is how you can make a quick decision to buy this. And I think that there is an impetus on Canadian business to be more proactive in offering the solution rather than assuming that government knows how it's going to spend all the money that it says it's about to spend, because I don't think that it has a lot of experience doing what it's about to do, because this is a very unprecedented situation.
It has been so helpful to hear you both kind of translate this moment in time for us. We always leave listeners with practical takeaways, things that they can put into practice immediately. Based on the discussion around the US-Canadian deep ties, what's one lesson from our former deep integration that leaders should be considering while they pursue new international partnerships?
I'll speak from the economics perspective. When I'm forecasting the U.S. economy, obviously there are a lot of questions about, financial markets, and whether they're frothy, about whether the Federal Reserve, with its new governor, will be able to cut interest rates without stoking inflation, things like that. The one indicator that I'm most closely keeping an eye on is U.S. productivity, which had a significant uptick in the second half of last year, particularly the last quarter of last year as well. And that might have to do with the massive investments in artificial intelligence that they're making. There are a lot of risks when it comes to not only the U.S. economy, but the global economy. But if it is possible for, our closest neighbor and the economy that we have the closest connections with, to be able to thread the needle of being able to increase productivity while at the same time cutting interest rates and continuing to grow their economy in the financial market, that's a very, promising type of trajectory that Canada should think about how we can use that to be able to grow our economy as well.
Mike, when it comes to priorities over the next 12 months, how should Canadian business leaders be weighing their opportunities at home versus the need to diversify?
I'll sort of end where I started, which is I think that there is an opportunity to learn from other jurisdictions. And I think that what Canada is doing is not unique to this country. And the geopolitical trends that Trevin and others have been talking about, they're simply not Canadian unique trends. And other countries are responding to them. And we have lessons to learn from all those countries. And there's also incredible Canadian talent that live in all those countries that we should try to attract back home to work on those problems. And so I think I would look around my management team and my board, and I'd say, who here has done this before? And if we don't have anyone there, there are Canadians who can hold it, or people that want to come and make Canada their home that should be attracted to join the management team who have experience in what we're trying to do. We shouldn't feel that this is for us to solve ourselves. There's lots of global talent to pull in that would love to live in Canada to execute on it.
Well, you are a good example of talent that has chosen to come back. So thank you very much, Mike McNair, Trevin Stratton. Thank you for making sense of this moment and for bringing such a rich conversation.
Thanks, Hilary.
Thank you.
Here are your takeaways. Signals are mixed, and in Canada, expect them to stay that way. That said, government is ready to buy and business has agency here to dictate the next steps. Be specific, bring solutions to the door. And remember, this is not a Canada-only story. Middle powers everywhere are retooling for a world where economics and security are fused. And that fusion should be reframing every major investment decision you make. There are playbooks for this in Europe, in the Gulf, across the global South. Look to them and seek out the Canadian talent abroad that's already lived them. This is a moment of realignment, and the leaders who adapt to it will absolutely define the next cycle. So, thanks again to Mike McNair and Trevin Stratton for joining us, and thanks to you for listening. As always, we love to hear from you. You can email us at circleback@deloitte.ca. And please like, download, subscribe, and share this episode. It makes such a difference. We'll see you next time.